The name Casanova is almost universally associated with the idea of a seductive and often untrustworthy lover. But the famed Lothario was also an author, scholar, violinist, occultist, gambler, wizard, libertine, and more. This is the crazy real-life story of Casanova. Thanks in large part to the popularity of his autobiography, Casanova's reputation has been romanticized as a great wit, a prolific lover, and an intrepid adventurer. In reality, the dude was pretty scummy. Of the 120 sexual partners he claims to have had, many were children, slaves, unwilling partners, and in at least one case, his own daughter. He was also a conman and criminal who would do whatever he could to get the money he needed to afford his lavish tastes. While he claimed deceiving a fool is an exploit worthy of an intelligent man, people were still hurt by his deception and theft. The following facts of Casanova's life story are largely drawn from his autobiography entitled Histoire de ma vie, so they should be taken with a bucket of salt. That being said, the guy had a pretty eventful life, so let's get into it. Giacomo Casanova was born in 1725 in Venice, Italy, the child of two actors, Gaetano Casanova and Zenetta Ferrucci. However, Casanova believed he was the illegitimate son of Michele Grimani, the owner of the theater where his parents worked. Being the son of a courtesan and a nobleman was more in keeping with Casanova's self-image. He saw himself as a high society man with low morals. Whatever the case, his father died while still a young man, and his mother left her son to be a touring actress. As a result, the young Casanova was primarily raised by his grandmother, Marzia. As a child, Casanova suffered from frequent nosebleeds. When he was 8 years old, his grandmother used the traditional remedy of witchcraft to stop the bleeds. In his memoir, Casanova recalls being taken to the island of Murano, where a witch told him he'd soon be visited by a beautiful stranger. That night, he had a vision of a woman coming down his chimney and kissing him. From then on, his nosebleeds stopped, but he developed a taste for strange women. More than anything else, Casanova is associated with his reputation for being a prolific lover, so it's no surprise that he got started at an early age. On his 9th birthday, he was sent away from Venice to Padua, where he lived in a rundown boarding house. While in Padua, Casanova's tutor was a young priest named Dr. Gozzi, who instructed him in both academia and the violin. The young Casanova also received a different kind of education from Dr. Gozzi's younger sister, Bettina. Casanova writes that when he was 11 and Bettina was 14, the young girl kindled in his heart the first spark of a passion, which afterwards became in me the ruling one. Bettina's kisses and innocent caresses were Casanova's first sexual experiences, though obviously not his last. Physical love was not the only subject in which Casanova was something of a prodigy. Even from a young age, he was noted for his quick wit and voracious appetite for learning. He entered the University of Padua in 1737 at the age of 12 and graduated with a degree in law at the age of 17. But Casanova said he felt, quote, an invincible repugnance toward the practice of law. Instead, Casanova fostered an interest in medicine. He said that, given his way, he would have become a physician, describing the profession as a profession in which quackery is still of greater avail than in the legal business. Casanova also studied moral philosophy, math, and chemistry, but the main thing he learned at university was gambling. In fact, it would go on to be one of his greatest pursuits and greatest downfalls. Casanova's gambling debts became so outsized during his college years that his grandmother had to bring him back to Venice. It might be hard to think of the lascivious and gambling-prone young Casanova as an instrument of the Christian church. However, after returning to Venice, Casanova was given minor orders by the Patriarch of Venice. Basically, he became a low-level clergyman and began working as a clerical lawyer. However, this kind of work did not support the rock and roll lifestyle the young dandy was aiming for. So Casanova started to ingratiate himself with a wealthy senator in hopes that he would become his patron. Avise Malipiero was a 76-year-old senator who owned a palatial estate, and Casanova managed to make himself Malipiero's constant companion. The elder man taught Casanova about society, scrumptious food, and wine, but this relationship was not to last. One day, the two men were visited by Teresa Imer, Malipiero's 17-year-old neighbor. The old senator had long fancied the young girl, but when he left the room, Casanova and Teresa started getting frisky. Malipiero caught them in the act and promptly beat Casanova out of his home with a stick. After the death of his grandmother, the young Casanova entered a seminary with the intent of becoming a priest. However, his gambling debts soon landed him in prison, and not for the last time either. His mother then found him a position working with a bishop, but Casanova quit when he decided the position wasn't for him. His memoirs state that he ended up working as a scribe for the influential Cardinal Acquaviva. This position led to the unlikely meeting between the lascivious young Venetian and Pope Benedict XIV. Casanova asked the Pope for permission to eat meat on Fridays because fish caused an inflammation of his eyes. He also asked for permission to read any and all forbidden books. In It turned out that the Pope liked Casanova's quick wit and was actually amused by his impertinent questions. So Pope Benedict said yes to both Casanova's queries, but forgot to give him written permission. However, Casanova's career in the church was cut short when Cardinal Acquaviva dismissed him following his involvement in another scandal. Surprise, surprise.
But he's a Caccioli, a nun.
Somewhat shockingly, though, a later pope would award Casanova the Order of the Golden Spur, which is a papal knighthood for those who have done great service to the church. Following the end of his brief career with the church, Casanova bought himself a commission as a military officer. However, he abandoned the commission after he gambled most of his money away. He then tried his hand at professional gambling, but lost whatever money he had left. Eventually, he fell back on the musical skills he learned as a child and played violin for a Venetian theater. However, his fortune was about to change yet again. At the age of 21, Casanova chanced upon a senator named Don Matteo Bragadin. The Don had dropped a letter while getting into a gondola, and when Casanova gave the nobleman his letter back, the senator asked him to come along for the ride. While in the boat, the senator suffered a stroke. Casanova soon used his medical knowledge to save the senator's life by wiping away some mercury ointment that another physician had applied, but his relationship with the senator wouldn't end there. It just so happened that Bragadin and his friends were devotees of the occult and had become convinced that Casanova had supernatural powers. So Bragadin basically adopted Casanova, providing him the wealth the young man needed for his libertine lifestyle. For the next several years, Casanova lived the life of a libertine nobleman funded by Bragadin. This allowed the young man to, as he wrote, lead a life of complete freedom, caring for nothing but what ministered to his tastes. Casanova's tastes tended toward gambling and, of course, erotic escapades. His patron turned a blind eye to his reckless lifestyle, but did warn him of the possible consequences. However, Casanova just laughed off Bragadin's warnings. The senator would turn out to be right, of course. Casanova recounts how he had angered a Venetian merchant by sleeping with the merchant's object of affection. To get him back, the embarrassed man sawed a bridge plank in half before his rival crossed so that Casanova fell in the mud. Casanova escalated the prank war by convincing the merchant that his bedroom was haunted. The prankster drove home the point by leaving behind an arm of a corpse that he had dug up from a fresh grave. The merchant was so frightened by the dead arm that he fell paralyzed and never recovered. Grave desecration and almost killing a guy, combined with an accusation of sexual assault, forced Casanova to flee Venice for the city of Parma. It was during his self-imposed exile that Casanova met the love of his life, the French woman disguised in men's clothing whom he called Henriette. She captivated Casanova with her wit, intelligence, charm, beauty, and then broke his heart. Depressed by his loss, Casanova returned to Venice where he had a hot streak in gambling. He used this money to sleep his way around Europe, including a four-way with 2 nuns and a French ambassador. While in France, Casanova joined the Freemasons, whose secretive nature was particularly alluring to him. He had already explored Kabbalism with his former patron, Senator Bragadin, and dabbled with another secret society known as the Rosicrucians. As a Freemason, Casanova managed to reach the rank of Master Mason, but all that forbidden knowledge came with a price. The State Inquisition of Venice hired a spy named Count Minucci to confirm Casanova's forbidden knowledge of the occult and then steal his secret library of magic books. Thinking that Minucci was a diamond dealer, Casanova showed off his occult knowledge by teaching Minucci how to summon elemental spirits. It turns out that this is not the best thing to do with an agent of the Inquisition. In 1755, the young libertine's decadent lifestyle finally caught up with him. He was arrested and charged with blasphemy, Kabbalism, gambling, astrology, and Freemasonry. He was taken to the much-feared prison known as I Piombi, meaning the Leads, which were 7 lead-roofed cells on the top floor of the Doge's palace. This torturously uncomfortable, flea-ridden cell was no place for a man of luxury like Casanova, so he immediately began planning his escape.
How long did you get?
15 years. But don't worry about me, I won't be here long.
After acquiring an iron bar, he scraped a hole under his bed situated directly above the Inquisitor's chambers below. His plan was to break through on holiday when he knew the Inquisitors would be gone. Unfortunately, 3 days before his planned escape, Casanova was moved to another room in the prison. Nevertheless, he kept trying, and with the help of a rogue priest, the 2 men managed to tunnel out through the roof of the prison on Halloween 1756. Casanova left a note saying, "Since you all did not ask my permission to throw me in jail, I am not asking for yours to get out." After escaping prison, Casanova fled back to Paris, where he hooked up with old friends. One advised him that a smart way to get in the good graces of the Parisian officials would be to raise a lot of money for the state, so Casanova helped establish France's first state lottery. Not surprisingly, the silver-tongued devil was excellent at selling tickets for it. Casanova soon built up a great fortune and worked his way into French high society. Once there, he used his reputation as an occultist, magician, and alchemist to con the wealthy out of their money. Casanova soon began rubbing shoulders with notable figures such as Madame de Pompadour and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He also developed some high-profile enemies. Casanova recounts a rivalry with another mystic by the name of Count Saint-Germain. Casanova describes Saint-Germain as, quote, the king of impostors and quacks, who convinced his marks that he was over 300 years old and that he could melt diamonds. One of Casanova's greatest victims was the Marquise de Yoff, a French noblewoman who had inherited her husband's estate at 29 and became very wealthy. When Casanova met the Marquise, she was 63 years old and had an obsession with the occult and alchemy. She often held gatherings attended by fashionable people in French society to explore these topics. Casanova, with his great magical reputation, was of course an honored guest at these gatherings. He told the Marquise that she could give birth to a male child into which her own soul would be transferred. She would then regain youth and the magical potential of a male wizard. How would Casanova accomplish this? By having sex with her, of course. When the 63-year-old Marquise failed to give birth to herself, as Casanova had promised, his fraud was uncovered, and Casanova eventually found himself banished from France by King Louis XV himself. Nevertheless, Casanova's adventures continued. He spent time as a spy, he owned a silk factory for a while, he failed to sell the idea of a national lottery to Catherine the Great, and he even talked hot air balloons with Benjamin Franklin. In his final years, however, he found himself in Prague, where he worked as the librarian at the Castle Dukes. This is also where he tried to tell Mozart how to do his job. At this time, opera was a sensation in Prague, and Casanova had developed an interest in it. While in Prague, Casanova met with one of his old friends from Venice, Lorenzo da Ponte, who was working as Mozart's librettist. When Mozart came to Prague, Casanova found out that he was working on Don Giovanni, a story of a compulsive sex addict not unlike Casanova himself. The experienced lover decided to send Mozart some notes, which may or may not have actually been incorporated into the work. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.